I want to move on and talk about the workshop today, which we're going to focus on reference tiddlers and essay tiddlers. And I'm going to kind of walk through an example of how to build on top of your annotations, but how to build something more substantive. Okay. And so I'm going to do this in the framework of exercise 403, I think. Yep. And this is preparatory to the one that comes next week. Marcus has a good start on his. Basically what you're doing is you're writing a project about hypertext in hypertext, and I'm going to ask you to go back and bring in the work that you've done in your current exercises so far and begin to point out examples of where you engaged in various practices and where you use different techniques. And we'll do that through tagging. We'll model annotation. I'll give you some ideas about how you might think about handling some reference tiddlers. And that should give you all the tools you need to sort of do this assignment over the next couple of weeks. This is all the leading up to the spring break, and then which I think comes in like 2 weeks. So, okay. So the objective is to create a framework, not to actually write the essay, but to build the tool. So you're building yourself a tool that you're going to use to write your essay. Okay. So you want to create a framework for your essay that includes references, annotations, and this structure. So I'm going to show you the structure soon. More specifically, there's only 4 steps, although each one of them is pretty complicated. You want to build a set of tiddlers to handle references, annotations, and examples. Okay, so you basically you might have built something to handle annotations. So you're beginning to think about, like Marcus demonstrated and Chris demonstrated, how Marcus has one set of annotations, definitions that he built off of links. Chris has another that he built off of tags. Either one of those work, but the idea is you want to have some mechanism to write on top of a text or underneath a text or inside of a text with your own thoughts. So that's a system for annotations. I'm going to show you how to think about systems for references. And then I'm going to show you how to do some examples based on that framework. Looks like I'm missing a set of square brackets there. Closing my link. You want to build annotations from several sources. If you've already built them, then just keep working in your annotator. If you haven't, then you want to catch up and do that exercise. You can use those 2 Vandendorp essays. You can use other readings tagged as references. I might add a few more in here. You can find your own. It's mostly about the exercise of annotating, although increasingly I want you to begin thinking about hypertext as well. I want you to annotate those sources to help you write that essay, and I'm going to show you an outline and then share it. So those are your 4 steps, but they're all pretty big. Okay, so let's look at a reference idea. Did anybody build tiddlers that have references, like to the sources, to the essays? I didn't really ask you to do that, but a couple of students were playing with the bibliographic exploration. Anybody do that? Where they began to think about what a bibliography would look like? Okay. So where are my references? So I'm begun to build out tiddlers in an example. I tagged them as references, and every source that you might put in a bibliography should have its own tiddler. Because that's a kernel of meaning, that's semantic value, and that's useful information, and you don't want to put all of your reference tiddlers in the same big list of bibliography. We want each reference in its own tiddler. I sort of put notes in mine, but if you think about it, what's the point of a bibliography? What's the point of a reference tiddler? What are you trying to do for your reader, and what are you doing for yourself? So let's think about you first, because this is a tool for writing. So what's the most important thing you want to have in your reference tiddlers? What do you need? What do you use it for? So Eric says you use it to somehow certify, to provide some external validation. You're thinking of me. Very generous of you, but do you personally need the external validation? You know it's a source. So what do you as a writer use it for? Don't think about what I need it for, what your readers use it for. What do you use it for?
To go back.
You go back, right? It's a bridge. It's a link. You have to be able to go and find the original source again. So more important than anything else for you is a link that works for you to get to the original source. Okay? So that's one thing. You can put that in a field. So you can put the URL in a field called my link or something, whatever you want. What kind of links are you going to build? If you live on campus or you are a SUNY Poly student and you frequently use the library, you can build permalinks to library sources. So one click takes you directly into the library. You may have to authenticate. Does anybody ever do that? So you go to the SUNY IT, SUNY Poly library, and you search for hypertext. We're going to limit our search to full text. Here's an interesting electronic book. I was stumped for a moment. Not exactly sure why they require me to log in, but I do. This is a pretty useful link for me and for anybody else at SUNY Poly, but not for those who are outside. So copying that link. Why doesn't that work? I missed a curly brace. So from there, I can go directly into the library whenever I want to. That's useful. So suppose that I wanted to talk about this. This is an interesting book, by the way. Think about your reader. What would be most useful to your reader? What?
To get more information about said topic or something?
This is about the reference.
Yeah.
So what would be most interesting for your readers to know? Yeah.
The explanation of where the link is going.
Okay, that would be helpful. So I might say, if you have access to SUNY Poly library, click here. I hate click here, by the way. So you might just try and get rid of as many words as possible. So if you have access to SUNY library here, how can we make that even cleaner? Yeah. Right, we can build the link inside our word so we don't have to have the ugly link there. I'll let you do that on your own. What else would be useful? Marguerite, what would you appreciate as a reader if you're reading along about hypertext, or if I'm writing a textbook for you and you're the student, you're the reader? What's helpful if instead of just saying, let's go and get the title of this book. I can say, go here, read this. What would be more also useful to you as a student? What would you appreciate? The assignments, okay, or the maybe even a zoom in of the specific page, okay, or the paragraph, yeah. But this is for the reference tiddler. So this is like generic. I'll come right back to you. Like if there's 10 different references, this is only the tiddler about this book. about this reference?
Maybe like
Like if you don't have access to the SUNY Poly library?
yeah.
Okay. How about this? Is this at all useful? I'll call it Google link. So if you've got a tiddler that looks like that, you click on Google, it takes you to that. That's not bad. The nice thing about that, this link is annoying and painful. You actually have to go there, find it, copy, paste it, make it, hope that it lasts. This link, if I have this, then I can build a link on the fly to Google, just like we built Wikipedia. So you can build a link, so anything that's in the Google query field, you can build a macro that click on the word Google and it will query that field against Google. And if it's in the title, you don't even have to have a separate field. You can just say, run the title of my tiddler as a Google query. And now you're building some interaction from data you already have. Okay, that's like, you can do that if you'd like, but I was just showing you some concepts. Yeah.
What's that symbol between Google and HTTP?
Okay. So since the beginning of time, we've shown how to write links in TiddlyWiki that are using the, gotta get it right, putting the grammar of hypertext in the punctuation of writing. So the grammar of hypertext says build a link. Punctuation of writing basically says make it as simple as typing a comma or a period. And so in TiddlyWiki, we can open a concept, anything with double square brackets, and this becomes a link followed by a vertical bar. Were you asking specifically what keystroke? It's the vertical bar. Left pinky, shift of the backslash, and then the other half of the vertical bar.
It looked like it was a capital I. Really.
Yeah, on the other side of the vertical bar, it becomes a link if it's followed by something that starts with HTTP://. So this will become a link to Google, I hope, and it does. Okay, yeah, the vertical bar. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so that's kind of a concept of how you can build out some different references. Let me go back to the, I'll save this, why not? It's there. So I would suggest that we still maintain some level of formal citation. So if this is my Google query, if I run this in Google Scholar, and click on the quote, I can get this nice text and put that in there. Especially if you're doing this for normal human beings. That's pretty much everyone other than the people in this class. Expect to see that formal citation. So certainly if you're doing this for any other classes, and I'd encourage you, if you've got papers to write for any of your other classes, write them in TiddlyWiki, just because you can. But all your other faculty are going to expect to see these citations, so I'm going to ask you to do the same. And it's not bad habit. If you ask me, that information is relatively useless to me as a reader. I can't do I can't act on it. I mean, I can manually copy and paste and build the link myself, right? Copy paste is a form of linking, if you will. But if you do the work for me and you build me a link to Google, that's pretty good. If you want me to buy the book, build me a link to, Amazon or something. And I have some issues about linking to Google as a commercial search, commercial service, but I can live with it. So you might want to put the citations in your text field. You might want to build additional link fields to Google or to the SUNY Poly library system, whatever is interesting. But for each one of your references, I'd ask that you use the text field to put a citation in. You can use the Google Scholar. I don't care which format. And you create a link field that will transport you to some place that somebody else can see it, and you tag each of them references. Okay, so now you've got a set of references. You can create a separate bibliography with all of your references listed. You can reveal or build links to your external links. You can put them on a peer, or you can just put them right out there. You can figure out ways to not display the whole ugly link, but so that's really obvious to your reader to click on. You might want to figure out how to tell them what they're going to see when they click on that, but that's up to you. If you categorize your references, and someone in the video from last night categorized, there's books and articles and movies and blog posts and stuff, that using a tagging structure, you're adding value to your reference list. You want to reveal that in your bibliography. So if you use tags to categorize your references, figure out a way to make that clear in your bibliography, so that that's value that you've added, that's knowledge that you've created. Let's put everything, all that your knowledge should be out front. Okay. The annotations, each of your annotations, now that you're moving forward, each one of your annotations comes from a specific reference, a specific bibliographic source. So each one of your annotations should be tagged back to that reference. If it's also coming from a paragraph, you might want to tag it to the paragraph. But like we did in Vandendorp, those paragraphs get tagged to an essay. That essay becomes the reference. So they might have at least 2 tags. And then what I'm asking you to do, and some of you are beginning to do it, is your annotations you begin to associate with a concept or framework. And the concepts and frameworks we're using is the hypertextual practices, listing, linking, tagging, templating, and transclusion. And this set of techniques, linking, listing, tagging, templating, and transcluding in Tiddlywiki. So if the annotation that you've written is helpful for you to understand what linking means, or if it's a very specific thing, this is how you do it in Tiddlywiki, then you add that tag to your annotation. So then we're beginning to build out a framework. Okay. And then it's time to, now you've taken your notes. This is somewhat similar to the way that I learned how to write a research paper in 6th grade. I kid you not. Okay, anybody learn the technique of writing research papers on index cards? Did you use index cards? Yeah, anybody else use index cards? You did too? What's the concept of an index card? What'd you do, Trisha? What'd you do with the index cards? So you'd have like one idea on your index card. Yeah, you'd have like one idea on each index card, sort of like one idea in a Tiddler. And somehow on your index card, you'd have a physical mark that connected it back to a reference, kind of like a tag. And you might, when I learned how to write the papers, the idea was you took all your index cards and you put them in order. And then when it was time to write your paper, you just sit with your stack of index cards and look at it, write it, go to the next card, look at it, write it, go to the next card. It was kind of an interesting technique. When you were done, you'd look at it, and all the ones that are tagged with sources like A1 or A7, began with an A, then you'd know exactly which ones to put in your bibliography, and you'd have these other index cards which had those references. So we're basically, all I'm doing is teaching what I learned in 6th grade. It's not much different than that. So I want you to begin to build an essay and write an essay about hypertext. That's a little odd there, but there's basically, I'm thinking that there's a section that talks about some definitions that you could build from sources. I'd like you to find examples of hypertext in the wild, meaning Google News is in the wild. We looked at that. That's an example of hypertext out there. Wikipedia is hypertextual. So we've done 2. You might find a 3rd. Any web page, lots of examples, right? And then you might do something like what we did with Google News, where you said, here's an example of how you link in Google News. Here's an example of transclusion. Here's an example of templating. Here's an example. So you might want to use those 5 words and annotate Google News, Wikipedia, and a 3rd source. You could also bring in your own examples from your first exercises, the first 5 or 6 exercises that you've done, or any exercises that you've done. You can bring those tiddlers in and say, here's where I'm linking, here's where I'm listing, here's where I'm templating. And one way to write on your own tiddlers is to use either comments, or I wrote a little macro for you if you wanted to use show notes. So if I'm doing what's it called? Oh, I'll just use references. If I wanted to comment that, the backticks, anybody find the backticks? Your left pinky backticks. This is an example of listing. You might put the code in twice. And so you can put the code in comments, and then you get the results. That begins to, so we want to write sort of like commentary on your work. And then another way to do that, so I have a macro called show, and I'll show you where that is.
Using the macro.
Hmm?
Are you going to show us using the macro?
I could almost show you using the macro, right? It's called, what's it called? It's called show notes. So show notes has a little checkbox. If you check it off, the status turns to no, and all of your notes should disappear throughout your project. Let's see if it worked. Got too many open tiddlers. There, okay? So if I turn it on, your notes show up. If I turn it off, the notes disappear. So you could put that in your sort of journal tiddler and say, turn them on, turn them off. And that way you don't pollute your beautiful work with all these ugly red notes all over the place. And you're welcome to grab that. That macro introduces a couple of new features. Specifically that checkbox that sets the value of a field in a tiddler. So all it's doing is setting the value of this field called docs for documents to yes or no. And if it's set to yes, it makes it visible. If it's set to no, it makes them invisible. And that's a useful feature for all sorts of different things. It's similar to what Eric wanted to do. Eric wanted an open text box to type numbers, but you can use a checkbox to tick tags or fields on and off with different values. So, but you can also just use the comments thing, and that will work perfectly well. Okay, and so I was looking to see if you could bring in examples from your own work and tag your work to the techniques, tag the generic academic work to the practices, and see if we can make some associations. I mean, it feels sometimes like it should be there, but I just want to see if this works as a way of writing and thinking. So we did a lot of work in the first couple of weeks about using TiddlyWiki as a way of bringing in data, manipulating data, making stuff. Now we're seeing, can we use it as a tool for writing and thinking? So can you learn by writing hypertextually? And so this will occupy us over basically up to spring break. And that should be, I think, everything you need. You are absolutely welcome and encouraged to bring the hypertextual practices Tiddlers over. You can bring linking and listing and tagging, so you'll have these. Anybody explore how I'm doing this in this Tiddler? Anybody use this yet? So this is tabs. It's the tabs macro. Pretty cool. Did you use it?
Well, earlier today, I was still working on exercise 3.3.
Yeah.
And similar to on your Design Right Studio, where you have a contents tab right next to tools tab.
In which?
I added my own directory.
Okay. Yeah. So this is.
I'd assume.
Yep.
It's similar.
It's very similar. This is. I like this better than using TOC, better than table of contents. The table of contents is I find sort of annoying.
Right. So you add what was it? You add a field, right? And then
I have to look. I did something. Yeah.
The core UI. I particularly went into sidebar.
Okay.
And
Yep.
told it to add my directory tab before the.
To sidebar. Yeah. Yeah. You went. Yeah. I'm doing that with the display tab.
So I think
Yep.
it would be.
It's very similar. That's a different set of tabs, though. This is the same logic, right? Yes. So let's look at this and think about this from a writing perspective and from a reading perspective. Okay. Let me try this. Not good. Doesn't really like it when you do a table of contents on its title. Now I've hung it. Anybody ever seen this JavaScript error show up on yours? Yeah, I do it all the time.
I have.
Yeah, it's just annoying. Maybe it's come back, but basically you have to reboot or refresh. And whatever changes you have, you've lost. Pretty annoying. Okay, so here's two different ways of presenting the same information. One is with the list links, one is a list, and one is using tabs. I think they both qualify as listing. But do you see any important differences between the two ways, the first and the second? As a reader or as a writer? So any important differences here? What's the most important hypertextual practice? How would you know that? You're right. I don't know if I agree with you, but you're right. because you would imagine that my sorting is going to indicate importance, right? Especially, I think, in a list. Less so, perhaps, in a tab. So my goal, and I don't know if I'm accomplishing it, my goal is to, in a sense, say that none of those 5 are important. They're all equally important. And I'm thinking that this approach doesn't do that, but this does, or at least it gets closer. This treats all of them as sort of on the same level, and they're literally on the same level. Okay, they're not hierarchical to each other. A little bit moving left to right, you could argue that there's hierarchy. But I've been working on the idea that maybe we can write essays that are non-sequential, that allow you to present to your reader 3 or 4 or 5 ideas that are equivalent to each other, but not hierarchical. So you might play around with that. I like tabs for that. So I like that formulation, using tabs. And it kind of works, I think. So you might play with that. We'll see how that works. So let me stop there. I've done my 30 minutes of exercise stuff.